Hello and welcome to another session of Mordred's Community EU4 Talks Politics. This week, Kaiser is not with us, but we've got a special guest, our Byzantium player, the Martian. Martian, welcome to the
Hello.
program.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you could be here. Got plenty of questions for you at the end of this review, but first, just want to get your thoughts on last week's session. We saw a new player war, or a new rivalry breakout. The Netherlands found themselves on the receiving end of some aggression from Bavaria. Great Britain and Sweden stepped in. Do you expect Bavaria to continue their expansion?
I think we've definitely seen the power dynamic that we kind of held for a little bit in Europe just completely shatter. I mean, at this point, Bavaria and Milan are stepping into a whole new era, and so really they're going to be the ones getting to define the politics of this region. And it's just the curiosity to see how much the others can fight back against that.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Bavaria fielding an army roughly 100,000. They've got 150,000 manpower reserve, so it's going to be interesting to see what the Netherlands is able to do.
Hmm.
Other big changes in Europe this past session, myself, Hanover, pulled a little bit of a snake move, releasing Castile as a vassal and then leveraging the claims on Granada, swallowing up a little land at the end. How do you think players outside Iberia viewed that play?
I think the issue is right now for Granada is they have a severe lack of good friends. They don't have a lot of super powerful player allies. There's not really anyone that can easily bail them out. But also, this could be an opportunity for another, German such as Prussia to kind of take advantage of Hanover overextending themselves a little bit here.
Interesting. And as we rotate north in Europe, Sweden, unopposed from an eastern perspective, continued their expansion in that direction. Is there anything that can stop Sweden at this point as long as Hanover and Prussia continue to act as that buffer state between them and Bavaria?
I think it all comes down to their diplomacy at this point, because they could have lots of issues with other players, or they could have no issue for the rest of the game until they choose to have one. So I think right now they're probably going to take it slow, recover a bit of manpower, get up to their borders more secure, and really start expanding that economy. And I think after that, we're going to see them start being a big power player in this region.
And as we shift into a southern Russia, Georgia, quieter session than previous sessions.
Hmm.
They've been struggling ever since that original Moldova war. Economy still a little bit rough, but starting to piece things together, starting to cobble together a few ideas and catching up on technology. Any insight from your perspective as to where Georgia may be going next?
I think for them, it's just kind of obvious that they really only have one way to go, and that's north, and start eating up stuff. And obviously, that gets kind of scary as you start to border Sweden, but they have strong player allies in both Persia and the Livonian Order. So I don't see Sweden pushing too soon on them. So I think they've got a good amount of time to try and get their economy up better. The only issue is most of the land they're going into really isn't good land. So they've got to really race to get some of those better provinces up in the north there.
Yeah, relatively low development throughout this area. Trade goods not super great. All the fur is located quite a bit further north. I'll be interested to see what they can do. And as we shift a little bit further south, Byzantium moved into the Mamelukes along with the Knights. The Knights took a huge amount of land off the Mamelukes and really opened up quite a few players' eyes into what is now a very large Knights and equally strong Byzantium. Any insights you want to share about how the division of the Mamelukes was determined?
Yeah, from the beginning, I've been working with the Knights, and obviously it's a little interesting of a dynamic with them still having land in Anatolia and all that. But we kind of started talking and realized that because of the failed Jerusalem, that there was a new opening in Egypt. And so we decided to try and get the Knights down there and get them as much of that really good high dev Egyptian land as possible. And so I'm just currently going to be taking the stuff in that North Aleppo node that you see in Syria and letting the Knights kind of get up a real power base to kind of help them, punch a bit higher.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned the control of the Aleppo trade node. Very valuable trade goods over in Persia. The only way to get it into Constantinople is through Aleppo, so control of that node is key for an Ottoman or Byzantium player. Do you see yourself continuing to push towards those silks, or are your eyes focused a little bit more towards Europe rather than the Middle East?
I mean, right now, I'm not really looking to expand a whole lot. It's one of those things that, like, lots of the expansion I've done, like the past session at the very least, the only wars I was in was because of, the Knights asking me to join something or, being asked by other players to assist. And so I don't really see myself expanding a lot, but also I definitely am not planning on expanding towards Persia any, because we've actually worked out a pretty good arrangement between the two of us with us, exchanging some land freely and getting a nice solidified border between the two of us.
And how do you feel about our old friend Klemf, our former AQ player, now in Ethiopia, having a border with your faithful ally in the Knights?
That's going to be interesting. It's really all I can say about it. I'm not sure where that'll go. I think a lot of that is in Klimt's hands. I think if Klimt wants to be friendly, then we'll be friendly the rest of the game. If Klimt doesn't want to be, Klimt doesn't want to be. And, you know, personally, I'm kind of anticipating, him trying to pull a move at some point. Um, if anything, to, get a little bit of revenge for his previous nation. So,
And as we rotate over to Italy, Papal States were not present last week. Probably missed out on a huge expansion opportunity with the carving up of the Mamelukes, but Naples continued their consolidation and released Tripoli. Do you expect to work with Naples in the future, or are the Italians starting to separate and fend for themselves?
I think really, whenever the first crusade happened, obviously me and Naples were allied, and that's the reason why they got in on that land initially, anyways, is because we went in together on it. And so I have good relations with both Naples and the Papal States. Obviously, though, Jamie and Milan kind of, puts a lot of tension in the region that probably wouldn't otherwise exist. Considering how the Florence, Papal State, and Naples players haven't really had any conflict with each other yet.
Interesting that you
So
mentioned Florence. They've kind of flown under the radar so far as political and player wars go. They were involved in one
definitely.
of the first player wars with Milan, but they've put together a sneaky good game here. What do you expect to see out of them as we move into the 1600s?
I think we're going to see them try and stay quiet for as long as possible and keep building up because as of right now, I mean, they have a really strong eco, really good nation going here. And you can see them starting to sneak into France there, which I think is going to be a really big deal because as they start grabbing up that development, that's obviously going to help them out a lot. But also, I could see it being a point of tension with Milan. So we'll just have to see how that goes in the future. But obviously, they've been on good enough terms until now. So.
Yeah, they're already at 40% or 40 points of innovativeness. They've got quite a bit of mana stored up here. Great development so far. It'll be interesting to
Mhm.
see what comes of them. And then
Yeah.
as we take a step out and look towards India, our good friend Dat Guy over in Gujarat and Sierra over in Shun, how quickly do you see the Indians and Chinese becoming involved in European affairs, or are we still a few sessions away from that?
I think we're definitely a good ways away from that, especially with Shun. I think that they're going to stick out of it for as long as they can, try and consolidate a bunch. But I think that guy is probably only a session or two away from trying to start, getting really involved in those politics, especially considering the fact that he started grabbing like Hormuz and he started kind of working his way along the coast there. So he's obviously going to start coming into contact with Klimt very, very soon. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, it's interesting to note the Gujarat mission tree does send him into the Hormuz area. It gives him claims on quite a few provinces that Klemf already owns, so could be some tension
So they
there.
are allied. So,
We all know how long alliances last with that guy, though. And one of the biggest changes from previous sessions, little old quiet Norway is now a massive beast of a Texas. Canada, our former Ireland player,
gorgeous.
also doing pretty well for themselves. Between Canada and Texas, we've got over 1,000 development in the New World. How much should colonizers such as Great Britain, Florence, the Netherlands, the Pope be concerned about being able to maintain any colonial holdings in the New World?
I think it's definitely going to be interesting, and you can already see how several of the colonizers are really trying to avoid them. You see the Dutch going into Africa, the British going into Africa. Everyone seems to be kind of avoiding it for now because I think they all realize that they can't truly contest either one of them, just because of how strong the power base will be here and how really Europe is not stable enough to be fighting a major war in the colonies and back home.
Yeah, Texas in particular, they may be, let's see, Bavaria and Great Britain making a little more than them, but they may be third or fourth in income right now. Granted, they've got quite a bit of consolidation to do. Their manpower numbers
Mhm.
are a little bit low, but it's going to be interesting to watch them.
Especially since they grabbed those gold mines early. I mean, that's going to really start to steamroll very, very quickly.
Yep, quite a bit of gold in the New World. It started to develop some of it, still quite a bit of growth there. So a few of the
Mhm.
gold mines are creeping up towards that 7 number. Some people prefer 10, some do 15, but still plenty of room for growth from an income perspective over in Texas.
Yeah. And more gold provinces to capture. So
Now, let's pivot for a moment and focus in on Byzantium. Obviously, everyone knows you start off right under the heel of the Ottomans. First session, maybe the first war, was you against the Ottomans. You chose to go in, if I'm not incorrect, alone, without any player allies. Is that true?
yeah, I was planning on going in with the knights initially, but they weren't able to make that first session, so I had to just go in by myself for that.
Do you think that being able to go in alone and take the provinces you wanted put you in a stronger position in relations to others in the Balkan area, such as Wallachia, Moldavia, the Knights, etc.?
I think it was really powerful in the fact that I was able to peace out whenever I wanted to, which made it to where I could plan when the truce timer was going to end, which meant that in that second war, whenever all the other people were at war, I was able to fully occupy my Greece cores and not have to worry about them going into it then. And I think that's when it was really important. But even from very early on, I was planning on working with those players, and we were communicating very frequently and friendly for a good while over how the Ottomans would be divided. So
As you moved into the later stages of this season so far, you entered into a relatively costly player war with Georgia and AQ. You came out well on top, but had quite a bit of consolidation to do in the region. Things between you and Georgia have been quiet since that first war. What happened there? Were you able to negotiate a long term agreement? Is it more of a Cold War?
we haven't really talked a whole lot, but keep in mind in that first war, we actually never even had troops battle each other. I mean, it never really got to that point, just because of how the progression of the war went out. Um, and so we haven't really, been in direct conflict yet. And so with that in mind, I've been trying to be as friendly as possible. And if you notice, we actually worked out a deal in which I got the Ottoman cores they had previously integrated at the beginning of this previous session, and that was in exchange for buying them out of their pretty immense debt. So
Oh, yep.
we've been on pretty good terms, and at this point, I think we can definitely have a good relation coming forward because we've got a pretty good border between the two of us. We aren't really overlapping in trade nodes very much, and so kind of leave them to their own thing, let them expand, get more powerful.
And you mentioned powerful, so I'm going to shift a moment and we'll touch on Milan. Early in the game, you were close with a number of the Italian players. Obviously, there were some attempts to take down Milan, Milan being the aggressor or the Italians being the aggressor. Either way, saw you on the edges of those conflicts, but it never seemed like you fully committed into those wars. Any reason why?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. And the biggest one is that I've been at war nonstop the entire game. It makes it to where I can't really afford to go all in a very intense player war, especially against someone like Milan. And so I was really trying to just play the defensive with the Papal State and Naples, especially because I knew that if we started to push into Milan, I wouldn't be able to last the entirety of the war. I would suffer enough attrition that wouldn't have any troops, and I couldn't even help at that point. So when talking to my allies about that, I convinced them to go a more defensive route about the matter. And so we were able to hold in Rome and Napoli. And because of that, I was able to help for the whole war. We got the Pope white pieced out. The war ended in a white peace. Everything was safe. Um, had it been in a better moment, I probably would have tried to go a lot more in, but it just wouldn't have been smart. We wouldn't have ended up winning the war if we went on the offensive. So that's why I was always on the defensive there. And it looked like I didn't care about it or wasn't engaged in the war. And that's not true, just because I was trying to be smart about the war and make sure that we wouldn't lose anything in it.
Very interesting. And for those at home, Byzantium last week, big recovery session, doubled your manpower pool, taking some ideas down, caught up on tech, making some ducats. One interesting thing to note from last session, though, Milan has a chunk of, let's call it Israel or former Jerusalem lands. In
Mhm.
order to get there, I believe they needed military access through Byzantium. Is that true?
That was a classic case of me not understanding the consequences of my action. Because Milan asked for the access, and I didn't really put two and two together that he would be going for that land, because logically, if I was there, I probably wouldn't be bothering at this moment for that land. Especially when the Knights are going to be taking it, and the Knights already had most of the Mamlukian lands occupied. And in fact, those three provinces were occupied at the beginning of the war. It's just that because of it getting unsieged by the Mamluks, they were able to resiege it. Um, and so that was just me being really stupid. I wish I hadn't have done that now. But in all reality, he probably would have shipped over troops anyways in boats. So, you know, he probably would have tried to, uh, you know, basically extort us for that land anyways.
And it does seem as though he made the move for Jerusalem. Obviously, Milan went Orthodox early in the game. They're sitting in the center of a number of centers of Reformation, with Florence going Reformed, Bavaria going Protestant. So that missionary strength and extra missionary is going to be key for them coming out of the Reformation.
hmm Which really they've made it quite public that they actually don't care about that land. They're trying to use that as a way to get the trade lands, like the trade provinces in Egypt. So
Oh, really?
they've communicated. Jamie's communicated that to multiple people, so I don't feel bad for saying that. But that's why Jamie took it, is to try and use that as a way to trade into some of the better trade provinces.
Makes sense. What should
So
we expect out of you come Sunday? Not asking you to reveal anything, but another quiet session from Byzantium, a couple player wars brewing, maybe some further consolidation of AI. Anything you'd like to share?
my my personal hope going into every session is to have a quiet session. Unfortunately, I seem to be quite good at getting into trouble on at multiple points. But as of right now, I don't have any AI wars planned or anything. Like, this is just me chilling out, sitting around, watching the world spin a little bit. Really just watching what happens in Europe.
And when you take a look at Europe and watching what's going on, what are you most excited to see this coming Sunday?
I think I'm really excited to see Mind Boy's response, because I'm sure that Mind Boy is, as Netherlands is trying to plan something. And I don't know what they'd be going for. I don't know who they ask, who they'd call, but I'm curious to see if someone to marry him. I know more than I. So.
I may be keeping those cards a little close to the chest for this one, but maybe we'll talk about it again next week on review. Any questions for me that you've got?
Not really. I'm just excited that we've burned through the AI in almost the entirety of the game now. So it's just players basically at this point. So very exciting.
Yeah, I believe, I'm not positive, but as we look at the great powers, obviously Byzantium 1 down through 8, all players now. I believe this is
Yeah.
the first time that has occurred.
Hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, Delhi and France may have been on there last week.
I think it was Mamluks in France.
Oh, yep. Mamluks were quite powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So,
it's been an interesting game. We're right at 1580. I'd say things are start to get spicy around now.
certainly.
Well, thank you, Martian, for joining us. It was a pleasure, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak with you again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.